come to you. Through my pain, can you see me through? As I walk back toward your way, you come running and I hear you say, welcome home, my child. Welcome home, where you belong. Welcome home, my child. In my arms, forgiven. Welcome home.
Well, welcome. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. I'm Alex Kumpf, and I just want to welcome you home. I want you to know this is a place where you belong. You belong in God's house. You belong in God's family. And I want you to know that God has a purpose. He has a destiny for your life. And today we're going to kick off a series of messages called Eye of the Storm. And today we're going to talk about gaining a new perspective. And I want to start off in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17 and 18. And it says, for our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes on not what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Now, Paul was a guy who knew trouble. He knew storms. He had problems. I mean, the guy was shipwrecked 3 times. He almost drowned. I mean, here's a guy who spent half of his life in a prison cell. The guy's been beaten and thrown out of cities. So the guy knew problems. He knew storms. And so he writes to the Corinthians to encourage them that no matter what you're going through, I understand what you're going through. I've been there. But God isn't just going to leave you there. And so what Paul does is Paul gains a new perspective. And instead of seeing his problems as heavy, as ongoing, as something that he can't handle, what Paul calls his problems are light and momentary. Now, what does that mean? Why would Paul call his problems light? They weren't light. I mean, he spent half his life in a jail cell. How is that light? He was beaten. How is that light? But he gained a new perspective. And he knew that God is up to something. He knew that something was good. What Paul is trying to tell us, and what he means by light, is that I know that Christ has a greater plan and a greater purpose in all this. I might not see it right now. That's why I have to focus on the unseen. I have to look through the eyes of faith. That what Christ has in store for me, that the prize of Christ is so much bigger and so much more important. And so that's what Paul grabbed, and that's why Paul could go through storms of life. Another thing is Paul calls the storms momentary. That means Paul knew that if storms start, storms are going to stop. That life comes and goes in seasons. Ecclesiastes tells us there's a time and season, but God makes everything beautiful in his time. So we need to remember that God has seasons in our lives, and that the storm you're going through isn't going to last forever. At one time, there is going to be peace to that storm. You know, it reminds me of a story about a ship captain out of the 1800s. And here's a guy, a big storm comes up, and his ship gets shipwrecked, and it hits some rocks, and the guy gets abandoned on a stranded island. And so he starts praying out to God, and he's like, God, rescue me from this island. And the days turn into weeks, the weeks turn into months, and the months turn into years. And so the guy learns how to fish, he learns how to make tools, and every day he's crying out to God to rescue him, but there's no ships on the horizon, and nobody's coming. Well, one night he's out fishing, and this huge storm comes, and it's lightning, it's thundering, and the guy runs to a nearby cave. And so he waits for the storm to pass. And when it passes, he comes out of his cave, but he smells smoke. So he starts running over to where his hut was, his only home. And as he gets closer, he starts seeing this orange glow. And he gets to his hut, and he sees that it's burst into flames, and he watches his only home burn to the ground. And so he cries out to God in despair, and he says, why, God, why did you do this? This was my only home. How could you do this to me? I thought you loved me. I thought you cared for me. And out of exhaustion, the man just falls asleep in the dirt. Well, the morning comes and he wakes up and he's amazed because he hears voices coming from the beach. So he looks up and he sees men there. And he looks out further and he sees a ship in the distance. And so he gets all excited. He runs down to the beach and he sees an older gentleman. And he recognizes that this is the captain of this ship. So he said, "How did you know? How did you know to come looking for me?" And the ship captain said, "Well, we're out past the horizon last night, and we saw your fire signal coming up out of those trees. But we couldn't come to shore because of the storm, so we decided to come here first thing in the morning to see if there were any survivors on this island." Now, what did we learn from this story? We learned that what the man saw as tragedy, God used as strategy. That God has a plan, and just because we don't always understand God's methods doesn't mean that we can't trust God's methods. John 16:33 tells us, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world." Now, what is Jesus saying here? Jesus isn't denying that storms and problems aren't going to come in our life. But he's saying, look, you can overcome them. You have the same power as I do to overcome because my power is going to live within you. And so take heart. In other words, be fearless, be strong, be courageous, be joyful, cheer up. Why? Because I have the power. And greater is what's inside of you than anything in this world. And so we have a God who gives us the same power of Jesus to overcome every challenge that this world throws at us. That Jesus has deprived the storm's power to even harm you. It says in Romans 8:11 that the Spirit of God who raised Jesus from the dead lives in you. I want you to think about that. Jesus had some problems, but Jesus also overcame those problems. And the guy overcame death. And he said, man, you can overcome anything in this life because the power lives within you. And we have a Jesus that knows what we're going through. God became flesh and he lived among us. And Jesus was a human. And he knew what it meant to cry. He knew what it meant to hurt. Jesus has been hungry. He's thirsted before. He's watched loved ones die. So Jesus knows what it means to go through problems. He knows what it means to go through hurts. But Jesus didn't just go through hurts, he overcame those hurts. And Jesus offers that same power to you and to me. Now, I want you to remember, a lot of times in our storms we may worry and we may get fear. But I want you to remember this. Worry is telling God, I don't think you can do it because I don't see how you can. But faith is telling God, I don't see how you can do it, but I know that you can. So I want you to remember that today. I want you to remember that we have a God who not only understands what you're going through, that not only understands the hurt and the pain of life, that he's been tested in all the same trials that we've been tested, but we have a God who's overcome those problems. And we have a God that wants to give you power to overcome those problems. Well, I want you to join me next week. Next week, we're going to talk about where is God when life hurts. And I'm going to share a story about how God miraculously healed my mother. So I want you to join me next week. And we're going to continue to see how God brings overcoming power to our storms.
Welcome home.